Hello, everyone. Hello, thank you. Welcome to our session on the science-based targets for nature. We're glad to be part of the ending sessions in the main room of the second day of the Nature Hub. Thank you for having us. Yeah, yes, very much. This session is really designed to help you understand and learn about the corporate water targets landscape, how and when to engage with them, and the upcoming Science-Based Targets for Nature version 1.0. And we wanted to start off just with a thank you. If you are an SBTN partner or part of the SBTN corporate engagement program, can you please raise your hand? Thank you. Thank you for your support, your engagement, your enthusiasm. We give a little clap. Thanks, everyone. So my name is Nicole Tanner. I'm the Director for Corporate Water Stewardship at WWF US, and I will be your MC for today, keeping us on time so we can all get to our next sessions. And here's just a quick look at what we have planned for today. We're going to hear about an overview of the freshwater biodiversity crisis and the need for freshwater targets, the role of AWS Science-Based Targets for Nature and other frameworks in the water stewardship journey, and then turn over to learn more about how SBTN and NGO support to companies on target setting and implementation process might happen. We'll have some breakout conversations where you can stay at your tables and we have some questions to guide us. We're really looking for your input, your feedback. This is a chance for you to raise any questions that you might have from what you've heard so that we can follow up after. And then we will have some time to report back and hear from you about what you discussed. And then we will wrap it up, close out. Okay. So our first section, we will hear, I'm going to invite Professor Stuart Bunn up to the podium. He is with the Australian Rivers Institute and the Griffith University and Earth Commission to tell us a little bit more about why we're all here.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation to be here today. Let me see if I can advance a slide here. So my talk today is really to introduce a little bit of the work of the Earth Commission and set the scene about why we might need freshwater or targets for freshwater systems. And I think the need for targets is pretty obvious to everyone in the room. We're not doing a really great job of managing our freshwater ecosystems, and they're threatened by a whole range of human activities. And that really poses a major challenge then for human water security, and of course also poses a major threat to freshwater biodiversity. And we're talking about a significant part of the world's biodiversity. Your freshwater systems making up such a tiny fraction of the land surface, but accounting for a very large proportion of the vertebrate species in particular on the planet. And of course we've seen a major collapse in populations of freshwater systems since the 1970s, and we're not only losing then that freshwater, that significant biodiversity, but we're also losing a lot of the services that they provide, including things like the provision of food through fisheries. When you look at what that means, this particular diagram, some work done through the World Wildlife Fund, what would need to be done to address that or to bend the biodiversity curve crisis? There's a number of actions that have been proposed, key actions that we can take that could really turn around the loss and help to restore freshwater systems. And the key ones that are listed up there, of course, include things like accelerating the implementation of environmental flows, improving water quality, protecting and restoring critical habitats in river systems. And those top three in particular really align very well with some of the work that we've been doing in the Earth Commission in setting targets for Earth system boundaries. Just to give you a little bit of an introduction to the Earth Commission, for those that don't know, it's a key part of course, the Global Commons Alliance. It's made up of a team of commissioners with a broad range of experience across the biophysical sciences and social sciences, law and topics like governance. It's co-chaired by Jan Rockström and Joyita Gupta and Chinda from the Chinese Academy of Science. And we're well supported by a very large group of scientists in a number of working groups who've been helping us put together the Earth system boundaries. One of the key distinctions about the work that we've been doing with the Earth Commission is not just defining safe boundaries in the sense that the planetary boundaries that you might be familiar with, but also looking at not just what's safe for the Earth system, but also what's just for humanity as well. And so the Earth system boundaries go well beyond the planetary boundaries, ensuring that we have a safe planet and we provide justice for people. We're setting boundaries that go beyond just the climate dimension. And importantly, although the focus is on setting the global boundaries, we're also considering downscaling that to local and regional scales. And that really helps us then to be able to translate those sort of global boundaries into science-based targets that are relevant at the local and regional scale. The key thing, as I mentioned, each of the Earth system boundaries has been analysed through a justice lens. So when we talk about justice, we're talking about justice among different groups of people. We're talking about justice between generations, and we're talking about justice between, for humans and for nature. And the just boundaries that we're talking about are really intended to minimise harm. And the reason for that, of course, is for some of the dimensions that you'll see, people are experiencing impacts well before the Earth system impacts are being felt. So a just ESB, Earth system boundary, may need to be set more stringently than the safe one, as you'll see. So these are the key dimensions that we've looked at within the Earth system boundaries. As I mentioned, that some of them there, the red areas there are set to be the safe boundary. The blue lines that you can see are the safe boundaries for those dimensions. And where the safe and the just boundaries are equivalent, they've been shown there in green. And the one that you can see for climate there is an example of what I just mentioned, that we've already exceeded the just boundary for climate, and we're fast approaching the safe boundary where multiple tipping points would be triggered. And so the positions that you see there, the little globes, represent where we are on those dimensions at the moment. But the key thing you can see for all the other dimensions, the two on the right-hand side on ecosystems, the intactness of ecosystems and the functional integrity of ecosystems, you can see we're already outside the safe and just boundary. And then for the water boundaries, we've looked at surface water and groundwater. We can meet the safe Earth system boundary for surface water in about 2/3 of the land surface, but only looking at after about half of the global population. For the groundwater target, for the groundwater ESB, we're about half of the Earth's surface is already outside the global ESB for groundwater on an annual basis. And then from a water quality perspective, we've looked at the two key nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, which of course have major implications for eutrophication. And again, we're well outside the losses, the surpluses of nitrogen and phosphorus already exceed the safe and just boundaries that we've set. Now, the methods for doing that, for setting those freshwater and nutrient Earth system boundaries, are really aimed at protecting freshwater ecosystems, protecting biodiversity, but also protecting the essential services that freshwater systems provide, things like clean drinking water, productive fisheries. And so the boundaries that we're talking about here are enabling the provision of environmental flows, sufficient surface water for that, preventing groundwater depletion and making sure that aquifers don't decline, and avoiding eutrophication. So the methods that we've used are really key when we're talking about safe and just boundaries. Those are the things that we're aiming to protect. And we can take those global numbers, so they're not just a single global target. Of course, we can downscale those Earth system boundaries and start to assess where in the world is there sufficient surface water to meet human needs and still remain within a safe boundary. We can also look at things like what proportion of the groundwater recharge would be needed to meet those needs if you can't meet it with surface water alone. We can map over the top of that where groundwater drawdown is already exceeding the recharge rates, or if groundwater recharge is declining over time because of a changing climate. And we can assess where we are in the world at the moment, where are we currently inside or outside the safe and just Earth system boundary for water. And similarly for the nutrients, we can do the same thing. We can look at the world and see where in the world are we already exceeding the surpluses for nutrients. This is a diagram. The red areas in the maps here show quite clearly where there are major exceedances of surpluses for agricultural nitrogen, but equally also around the world where we could redistribute agricultural nitrogen and still remain within the Earth system boundary for that. So these global boundaries that we've set are easily downscaled to the regional scale. And then because of that, we're also then able to look at what kinds of transformations might be used to actually come back within and stay within the Earth system boundaries for both water and for nutrients. And I see my time is up, so I'll hand back to you, our Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Stuart. We really appreciated that. It's always nice to be reminded that the Earth is finite. We are hoping to take really robust, meaningful action on a renewable resource in a just and equitable way without leaving out freshwater ecosystem needs. I want to turn it over to the first part, Part A of our agenda today, and welcome up Scott McCready and Guyan De Silva. Scott is the Chief Strategy Officer for the Alliance for Water Stewardship, good friend, and my colleague Guyan De Silva, Senior Program Officer from WWF on Corporate Water Stewardship.
Thanks, Nicole. Advance warning, some of you are about to get a crash course in Scottishness. As Nicole says, I'm Scott McCready. I work for Alliance for Water Stewardship. Myself and Guyan, we're going to talk about the roadmap of corporate water target setting, approaches, tools and guidance. And that's really about the architecture of water stewardship. So I'll talk about that, and Guyan will talk about the place of targets within that. For those that don't know, AWS is a sustainability standard system for water. So we are custodians of a standard, the AWS standard, that guides sites to better water management practices and out towards catchment. So we essentially make kind of operational facilities like farms, factories, data centres, collective action ready. Why are we presenting together? Well, the reason is we're actually not representing our organisations, we're representing kind of the water stewardship community. So the water stewardship community is a kind of informal kind of collection of NGOs and platforms. So there's AWS, there's CDP, there's Ceres, there's Seal Water Mandate, there's GIZ, TNC, WRI, WWF, others. If I've not said your name, I'm really sorry. Most have been involved in SBTN to a greater or lesser degree. So I'm actually quite proud to be part of the water stewardship community, at the risk of sounding incredibly kind of emotive. I think it's got several strengths. So firstly, it's collegiate. We tend to get along. I think we like each other. We share a belief in companies being a platform to achieve environmental and social outcomes. We also believe, because of that, that working with companies can further our mission. And because of that, we collaborate. We collaborate to make things easier. So we collaborate to make things easier for companies to do things, but we also collaborate to make sure that the things we provide to companies have an impact. So that collaboration, it tends to take two forms. We make products and we start initiatives. So products can be things like diagnostic tools, it could be guidance, it could be frameworks, it could be a standard, it could be a disclosure system. Various things that we create that companies can use in their kind of corporate headquarters and in facilities. Initiatives tend to be place-based things, so they tend to be things around collective action, so the Water Resilience Coalition. But they're not exclusively place-based, so they can be things about policy engagement, so the WASA Forum, and it can also be things about advocacy. So the community issued a joint statement towards governments in terms of how you create an enabling environment for water stewardship. That's what the community is really good at. What's really, really, really not good at is explaining how all of these things work together. It's explaining how these things connect and how they support each other. How do I know this? Well, I speak to companies a lot. I speak to new companies a lot in particular. And every conversation I have with them is exactly the same. And it always starts, which of these things should I choose? Which of these things should I join? Which of these is better than the other thing? And the answer is always the same. You don't choose. It's never an either or. There's a high degree of complementarity between all of the things. We focus on different things, but we also collaborate to a way that these things interact. Each of them are really an important piece of the architecture of water stewardship. I'd say that SBTN is probably the most important new piece of architecture in the water stewardship space in several years. And a bunch of us got together in Washington, DC late last year to talk about how we kind of launch SBTNs. And we realised we kind of had to take a step back. We had to explain the architecture, and we had to explain where target setting and where SBTN fits in. And this is it. Don't run. I'm going to explain. So this is an idealised corporate water stewardship journey that covers all of the main products and initiatives and guidance and so on and so forth that our community has produced. The thing to understand is the top two rows, the first two rows, this is an individual company. This is corporate headquarters. This is a single company. And what it's doing is the preliminary research within a company to understand where it is that you should act. So where it is an assessment based on your operations, your value chain, your footprint, etc., but also the basins. So where are you causing harm and where is there kind of potential risk to you? So single company, do these things at headquarter level, and you get to a point where you prioritise doing things. Now, the middle stage, this is sites. So this is farms, factories, data centres, any kind of operational facilities. And in contrast to stage one, this could be one facility, 5 facilities, 10 facilities, 20 facilities, 50 facilities, whatever the number is. It can be your owned operations, or it could be your suppliers, or it could be a mix of any of them. The point is that all of these things in these two rows are the things which good water stewards should be doing within their facilities. Where it comes back up again and it starts to turn blue is where this connects back into corporate headquarter level. So there's a verification aspect in terms of all the stuff that you've done in all of the individual sites. Well, that's verified by a single company. And what does it do with it? Well, it puts it into reporting. So all of the stuff in green gets fed back into reporting, whether that's voluntary reporting or mandatory reporting, and so on and so forth. I said I'd talk about the link between AWS and SBTN. So the main connection between AWS and SBTN is we operate at the same scales. So I engage with companies at a headquarter level to get them to do things at a site level. And it'll be the same with SBTN. A decision will be made on kind of where to apply SBTN, but the application of it will be at a site level. The complementarity between them really is, if you've used the AWS standard, you will have done a lot of the work that you need to set targets. The other thing is that if you've set a target, you will strengthen the outcomes of your AWS standard progression, because the AWS standard does not have a target setting facility in it. I think further down the road, we'll potentially look at mutual recognition. So potentially we might put in recognition of achieving science-based targets within the scoring for the standard, which means that there's an incentive for using the standards, an incentive back for achieving targets. But it's early days, but that's where I would like to see to go to. The headings in yellow, basically these are the simple things that kind of a good water steward does. So they seek advice from the community. So they assess impacts, so they understand the materiality. They assess the basins, so what is the context of the basin that you work in. From that, you prioritise. Nobody is asking anybody to do everything everywhere all at once. Once you've prioritised, you go back to site level, you develop plans. And within those plans, you set targets. You execute the plans in order to achieve the targets. But the ultimate goal of water stewardship is collective action. So we want to push people outward towards collective action with the stakeholders that they engage with. Once you've done all of those things, it's really a question of verifying your actions so that you can make positive kind of reporting. And what I'd say is if you do all of these things, you will have really, really strong disclosures. happy to take questions on this at a later date. I'm going to hand back to Guyan now. So Guyan's going to give a more in-depth explanation of targets.
Thanks, Scott. I'm Guyan De Silva. I'm with WWF. So, so Scott just laid out how different frameworks like SBTN, AWS, and others sort of fit in the wider water stewardship journey. But you'll notice in each of these boxes there are like a list of frameworks and tools that you can use, and you have to kind of make decisions in each of these boxes on which one to use. In particular, you might be wondering about this one. If you can, whoops, dramatic pause didn't work there. There you go. This one over here, and hopefully you can read the text, but basically this is the point where you set targets and it gives you three options. Well, kind of, this infographic on, you can choose between non-contextual, contextual targets or science-based targets. So those of you who have been in this space for a while will be familiar with all these terms. For those of you who are new to maybe the water stewardship space, just real quick in a nutshell, the water stewardship sort of sector movement started with non-contextual targets, which were like blanket efficiency targets, and then has evolved towards contextual targets, which sort of acknowledge that each locality is different and requires a different target depending on your priority issues. And now we have science-based targets, which allows you to actually put a number on that target that is backed by data, models, and science. So now that science-based targets are being launched, does that mean contextual and non-contextual targets are sort of defunct? We don't think so. In an ideal world, we would like to see companies deploy a sort of mix of science-based targets, contextual targets, and non-contextual targets across their whole portfolio value chain, if you like. So what we're working on right now, which would sort of be like an addendum to this diagram over here, is a decision tree or a decision matrix or a decision tool on how you select between the three types of targets. And yeah, this is sort of a template. We haven't developed it yet, but this is sort of like the next thing that we're working on right now is what sort of questions, what sort of decision factors go into choosing between a science-based target, a contextual target, and a non-contextual target for each site. So there are some like fairly obvious ones that we can think of, like for example, science-based targets for now only covers water quantity and quality. So if you have a high-risk site where the priority issue is not water quantity or quality, then you might prefer to go for a contextual target, right? That's sort of pretty clear-cut. Or if the site is low priority, low risk, you might choose a non-contextual target because you don't want to invest tons of resources in that. But there are some other questions which are more gray area, like what type of target is best for the amount of resources that I have, or like what target is best for the reputational or regulatory risks that I face. So this is sort of conjecture on our part on what sort of questions you might be asking yourself, but this is really where we want to hear from you all in the breakouts or after the session on like what sort of questions do you guys ask yourselves when you're choosing between targets? What are the sort of, what are the decision factors that go into you, as a business making a decision between these three types of targets? And we'd like to hear from you on that so that we can create the most kind of actionable guidance that resonates with most of you all. So I'll leave it at that for now, and I'll pass it on to Alan and Erin.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Guyan. I remember when water stewardship, we started all working on it as an NGO community on water stewardship 2008, 2009, and we were making the shift from water management into water stewardship. There were very different questions we were asking ourselves, and it's so exciting to see how things continue to progress and get more rigorous and really drill down into what is helpful, what's delivering meaning for companies in their supply chains and in their operations, and what is delivering benefits for the environment and people. And these targets are really really trying to put a nail on the head. How do we measure this? How do we ensure that we're making a difference? And so the next part, I'd like to invite Aaron Billman and Alan Townsend up to give an overview of the science-based targets for nature themselves. Aaron Billman is the Executive Director for the Science-Based Target Network, and Alan Townsend is the Senior Program Officer at WWF for Freshwater Metrics and Stewardship. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be here. I am going to frame the full picture of the scope of Science-Based Targets Network and who we are, and then defer to Alan on all things freshwater. So Science-Based Target Network exists to answer this question. What can a company do today to ensure it's doing its part for an equitable, net zero, nature-positive future? There are lots of targets that exist out there, but there isn't comparability. There isn't a common good product that is backed by a critical mass of NGOs that's all saying the same thing. That is what we're working on. And I'm excited about the first version of Freshwater Science-Based Targets coming out soon that is going to be part of this broader integrated picture. So if you're familiar with climate science-based targets, that's the Science-Based Targets Initiative. It's the source of inspiration for Science-Based Targets Network. The same 4 partners behind Science-Based Targets Initiative are part of the network, and we're expanding beyond climate to cover the full spectrum of a company's impacts on Earth's natural systems. What we've got going for us today is that, as you heard in the beginning, we've got the corporate engagement program. There's a lot of companies, over 120 companies, that are participating in that program. We have Jess McGlynn here today, who directs that program in the event that you're not participating and you're interested in learning more. This partnership is incredibly important for us because we are trying to balance the rigor and robustness with the pragmatism and feasibility of making sure that we're designing products that can be used and are useful while not losing their scientific foundation. And so this is a participatory process. We use that feedback. It's very important for informing our current priorities and our future priorities, and we appreciate the teamwork of those organizations involved. Where you might imagine this going is that with a common approach, there becomes a means for evaluating, is a company doing enough? Is a company doing its part to meet global goals? And with the Global Biodiversity Framework agreed upon in Montreal, we see ourselves as a key mechanism for companies doing their part, particularly for Target 15, but not limited to Target 15. So assessing impacts on nature and plans to quantitatively reduce those impacts. We partner importantly with Task Force on Nature-Related Disclosures, so that the LEAP framework is drawing directly from our corporate target setting guidance, and we are aligned on other key aspects of our work, so that you can imagine a company using our guidance to assess and set targets, and then the TNFD framework for disclosure. And that's just one example. I was happy to participate in CDP's workshop yesterday on updating the freshwater questionnaire to take into account the leadership on the freshwater side of the things with the content coming out. So last from me is, let's see, the cursor is thinking about working. It's just setting the stage for Alan so that you can imagine where it fits in the broader framework of science-based targets for nature. So nature we define as a company's impacts across land, freshwater, oceans, and biodiversity. The Freshwater Hub leads on the target setting methods for that particular issue, but the entry point for a company is actually holistic. It's across land, freshwater, ocean, biodiversity, and doing an assessment, a materiality assessment, a mapping of the value chain, looking at that full picture, and using that to interpret and prioritize where a company has the most influence and the places that need to be prioritized. So in the case of freshwater, given the focus today, an example would be prioritizing water stress basins and the basins in which you have direct operations therein or key upstream sourcing. So those steps 1 and 2 done for nature broadly then help you identify the issue areas and places where you need to set targets, and that moves into step 3. Our first version of science-based targets for nature are going to cover some of the topic areas, but not all. So in addition to covering climate via Science-Based Targets Initiative, and importantly for the land-based companies, the FLAG guidance, if you're not already familiar with that. Then the freshwater quantity and quality, Alan will get into more details about that scope. And then the first target setting methods on land as well. So it won't cover ocean. It will cover biodiversity to some extent by covering some of the key drivers of biodiversity loss, which is the important first step in that space. And we anticipate that we'll continue to build out our scope with future versions from there. Importantly, on ACT and TRACK, the conservation or mitigation hierarchy is akin to the waste management comparability of reduce, reuse, recycle, if you're familiar with that hierarchy. And in the space of nature action, the equivalent is first and foremost avoid, then reduce, restore, regenerate, and we've added a transform because of a nod to the need for broader systems transformation and business model transformation. And so you'll see in our guidance methods and tools that kind of focus on the most important step is avoid and reduce. It's the hard work. It's not nearly as alluring as restore and regenerate, but it pays huge dividends for both your company's security of supply and other risk management, as well as for broader societal value. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Alan to get into more specifics about step 3, freshwater.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alan Townsend. I'm as Nicole alluded to, I'm the Student Program Officer at WWF. I'm also have the privilege of serving as the co-lead with CDP on the SBTN Freshwater Hub. And so today I'm going to give an overview of the step 3 of the guidance and the Freshwater Hub as a whole. As I mentioned earlier, the Freshwater Hub is co-led by WWF and CDP, and then along with the Pacific Institute, the Nature Conservancy, and the World Resources Institute. These organizations are collaborating to develop this guidance. We also have received support, technical support from Limnotech. And then along the way, as we talked about earlier, there's been quite a bit of involvement with the community and stakeholders as a whole. So back in 2022, we conducted several pilots in various parts of the value chain for Procter & Gamble, General Mills, and Suntory. We also had technical support for those pilots with Future H2O, Earth Genome, and Qantas. And lastly, I just want to acknowledge the philanthropic support of our supporters, the Walton Family Foundation and the Gordon Betty Moore Foundation. So with that, this work has been years in the making. As it pertains to the science-based targets, this initially started back in 2020. There's been a series of technical advisory group and practitioner advisory group review back in 2021. As I just mentioned, there was several pilots, and we've also gone through expert review panel review, and then just recently, last fall, we had a public consultation where we received quite a bit of feedback. And through each of these steps, we've tried to take in the feedback, improve the guidance, make it more practical, while also having the scientific rigor. And as Aaron mentioned, we will have the guidance here in early 2023. And then, looking ahead, we're already, thinking about, well, what's going to be in version 2 of the guidance based on some of the early learnings that we have from the public launch. And so, just as an overview of the guidance that Aaron already alluded to, but specific to freshwater, companies will, in steps 1 and 2, take an initial screening for the materiality of water in their operations, and then also do an assessment of the state of nature, their pressures on the state of nature. And then finally, at the end of step 2, establish a target boundary for their direct operations in their value chain. And then in step 3 is where companies will dig deeper into the sites at the location, at the location base, and establishing targets where there are priorities. And then obviously the circle continues to step 4 and then step 5. So within the scope of step 3 for freshwater, there are 2 main components: water quality and water quantity. Within water quantity, within water quantity, there is surface water flows, and then groundwater, where there are local models. And then within water quality, focus on nutrients, nitrogen, and phosphorus. And then in terms of as I mentioned earlier, with the focus in the value chain, it will be in the direct operations in the upstream value chain. In future versions of the guidance, it will expand the scope of freshwater quantity, looking at groundwater globally, looking at toxic chemicals, thinking about downstream, and then also, as Aaron alluded to, incorporating biodiversity and then future forward-looking considerations. There are 4 main components within step 3, and this is a little bit different than we might have seen in the public consultation. But essentially, companies will start off by selecting a model based on a stakeholder consultation to identify what are the appropriate models, whether it's a global or local model, and understanding which one to use to set their targets. Companies will then measure their baseline to understand the pressures that they have had on the state of nature, and then using that information and then comparing that to the thresholds for whatever aspect that they're looking at, to use that to establish a target. And so this is an example specific to a company for withdrawals, but it shows kind of the interaction between the state of nature and then how a company would set a target based on the thresholds in those basins, and using the principle of companies, setting targets based on their fair share. And then lastly, at the end of this process for step 3, companies will have a variety of targets that they can set on water quality and quantity that are time-based, they're specific, and they're time-bound. Here are 2 kind of examples that companies can have on an annual basis, depending on the context of the location that they're in. They could either be annual or monthly, depending on the situation.
What I love, that it's always true in the water space, no matter what you're working on as part of the water stewardship journey, you're going to do stuff alone and you're going to do a lot of stuff together. So welcome to the together part. So there's a lot of people here. Can I just get a quick show of hands, the different sectors that are in the audience? Can you raise your hand if you're in the NGO or consulting world? Okay, how about the food and beverage sector? Okay, any textile representatives here? Okay, technology, ICT, and pharma? Okay, any sectors that I have missed? Yell it out. Chemicals, thank you. Okay, so. One or two, yes? Sanitary, interesting. And? I'm sorry? Equipment suppliers, okay. And one more. Architecture. Wow, there's a lot more. Okay, we're not going to go into everyone. We were going to, originally we wanted to break out by sector because we think there's going to be nuance based on your sector, the questions that you might have and how you would deploy this through your supply chain. But given the diversity in this crowd, I think we'll just stick with whoever's at your table. If you're with a lot of your peers from your same organization, maybe spread out. It's okay to move around. And we have several questions for you guys to dig into. So at your table, we'd love you to think about some of these things, about how you would be implementing or questions that you would need answered before you can implement science-based targets for nature. So starting off, help us understand what brings you to this session, what are you hoping to gain, is anyone in your organization already engaged in the process? And if you could describe your internal engagement to build awareness and support for water stewardship or nature stewardship, more broadly within your organization. And then to what degree has your organization assessed its water-based risks? And I'll be scrolling through these. I think there's printouts at each of your tables. We'd also love to hear if your organization has a tailored action plan to address water-related challenges or nature strategy, and if you can describe how that fits within your broader sustainability efforts. There's a lot. We're going to keep going. You don't have to touch on all of these. How can the environmental NGO community help advance companies in their nature stewardship journey? Or what programs or commitments focused on freshwater, land, biodiversity, or oceans might you all have or have had or seen serving as a foundation for engagement in SBTN? And then the questions that I am most excited about. One more set. Are you seeing or part of any cooperation with other companies around your work on nature? How comfortable is your organization in communicating its goals and efforts on nature with its stakeholders? And where are the tools, resources, or support you'd like to see for facilitating great collaboration and collective action? These are suggestions. Please keep track. I'm going to ask the WWF and SBTN crew to filter out and make sure that we can report back after 20 minutes. Thank you all.